Tough time never lasts, but tough people do. Robert H. Schuller. Preface. Lord, give me the guidance to know when to hold on and when to let go, and the grace to make the right decision with dignity. This could be the most important prayer you have ever prayed, and this book could be the answer to that prayer. For this book will provoke you to thought, action, to hold on until the light breaks, the tide turns, and the time changes for the better. To tenaciously dig in the bloom where you are planted, to inspire people with your cheerful attitude while you are going through such obvious difficulty time. In the process, you will inspire others to choose the noble and positive outlook. Or B. This book will inspire you to take action to make a bold and daring move, to make a creative transition, recognizing an era has come to an end. The factory will never reopen. The steam engine are never going to be manufactured again. Sometimes the cup has fallen, it is broken. All the king's horse and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty Dumpty together again. Now you may need to absorb the spell and develop new skills. This book will get you started on the path to success once again. Part 1. Tough time never lasts, but tough people do. When you have exhausted all the possibilities, remember this: you haven't. It was a harsh summer, the summer of 82. For many, it was as if the clock had rolled back to the 30s and the time of the Great Depression. Company upon company declared bankruptcy. Unemployment soared. The severe and prolonged recession, as it was dubbed by the media, sent ripples and depression across America. Politicians used the depression state of the country to their advantages. It provided a great opportunity to highlight the failures, shortcomings, and fault of the opposite political party. Democrats found in it an opportunity to blame the Republican administration which was in charge. Predictably, the Republicans, in turn, blamed the Democratic administration that created the problem, which the Republicans had inherited. Everybody was fixing the blame, nobody was fixing the problem. The problem persisted, the grew, the recession ramped across the country until nearly everyone was affected by it. No one was immune. I personally felt it as a pastor of Crystal Cathedral congregation and head of a national television ministry, which was broadcast on 169 television station every week. With 500 people on the payroll, we were operating on a budget of well over $20 million a year. The cost of operation continued to increase dramatically. Like the rest of America, we too were faced the tough economic time. No one could deny that the country had problems, but the biggest problem we had was our attitude towards the economic problem. Negative thinking spread like a plague through all levels of society. It was not easy to protect oneself from the infection of negative thinking, which was spread by words of mouth. by conversation with friends as well as strangers, by television screen and by radio news reports. It spread like quickly because in recessive time the of negative react tendency is to react negatively. Once an organism, a business, a life, or a country is infected with negative thinking, the infection attacks the mind, the heart, and the soul like termites the secretly gnaw away the emotional support system. It was in the midst of this national mood that I arrived at Hilton Hotel in downtown Chicago. I was there to present a motivational lecture at a major convocation, delivering lecture of inspiration as well as on successful management principles was nothing new to me. Each year I traveled from coast to coast, giving nearly 100 talks to doctors, executives, educators, you name it. However, I was particularly fascinated by this engagement. My audience would be members of the AG industry. AG is of course the abbreviation of agriculture. This industry represents those who are involved in the farming enterprise of the Midwest state of Iowa, Michigan, Illinois, and Min- Minnesota. Having been born and reared on an Iowa farm, I looked upon this as an opportunity to touch base with some of the people that came from the same soil I left 40 years before. My anticipation was a warm, inspirational evening was quickly dosed by a couple of sober looking gentlemen. The conversation bed pinned to their dark lap- lapels identified them as the man for whom I was looking. They greeted me with restrained enthusiasm. Dr. Schooler, thank you for coming. Their words reminded me of thousands of times I have arrived at same sense of tragedy in hospitals, mortuaries, courtrooms, and cemeteries. I have heard those words. Thank you for coming. I couldn't help feeling that I had arrived at the sense of some tragedy rather than at a motivational convention. The younger man spoke. There are 3,500 people in there waiting to hear you speak. His companion interrupted. These people are going through tough time. They don't want to hear your funny stories. They don't want to see you grinning from ear to ear like you do on television. They don't want a pat on the back with a hollow promise that everything is going to be okay. At that point, both men moved shoulder to shoulder to face me as if they meant to block me from entering the platform. The first man shook up. That's right, Dr. Schooler. These people are losing their farms. Their businesses are going bankrupt. Terrible pressure are being placed on their marriages and families. They need help, and more than anything else, they need hope. Give it to them. With that admonishment, they nodded to the sound man, whooping the microphone to my suit. As he did, I heard through the thin wall that separated the backstage area from the speaker's platform. The Master of Ceremonies introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure now to introduce our keynote speaker. His name is Dr. Robert Schooler. He is the pastor of the world famous Crystal Cathedral. This beautiful building was built as a cost of over $20 million, and we dedicated virtually debt free. No minister or priest or rabbi speaks to more people every week in the world or in the United States of America than does Dr. Robert Schooler from Graden Grove, California. It's our pleasure now to welcome one of the world's most successful men, Dr. Robert Schooler. Let's give him a great welcome. The sound of enthusiastic applause surrounded me as I stepped on stage to face this collection of depressed souls. 3,500 people were on their feet applauding me. The grand ballroom was packed to capacity. Inwardly, I shuddered. My careful planned speech had just gone out the window. The three jokes I was prepared to tell for many to tell for my own pleasure and for the purpose of warming up my audience now seemed out of place. I found myself walking across the stage without faintest idea of what I would tell these troubled people. I paced quietly from one end of the platform to the other, trying to collect my thoughts. I searched the eyes of the audience. I recalled the words of the stern, welcoming committee. I decided to recover my position by asking a question. They tell me that you are having tough time. Is that right? The question gave me time to embrace a dramatic pause. Such a pause can be lifesaver to a public speaker. I continued to pace back and forth, pretending to exude the confidence of a well-prepared lecture. I could tell that my opening question had grabbed their attention, probably more effectively than the three funny stories I had carefully placed in my front pocket. From then, from that point on, I delivered a spontaneous lecture that at times erupted with new insights. Wanting desperately to help these people and give them hope, I decided to address myself specifically to the pressing problem of this man and woman who represented an industry vital to the health and welfare of our country. They represented the core of the bread basket of America. The food in the market and on the table of our country comes from the labor and the labored shape of these agriculture businessmen and women. I remembered years ago what I was taught in my undergraduate studies in public speaking, lecturing, debating, and oratorical work in Hope College, Holland, Michigan, and again in my training at Western Theological Seminary in preparation for delivering sermons and talks from pulpits. The most effective speech is not the sermon but a witness. Essentially, the principle is the same. If you don't have any advice to give, you can always share your own story. If there has been any excitement, challenge, crisis, and resolution in your life, then share it. Everybody likes a good story. Drawing on this principle, I decided to share with the farmers how I handled the tough time in my life. I suspected that my audience was not aware of the fact that I too had tough time. My introduction portrayed me only as a very successful man, senior minister, founder, and builder of a $20 million internationally acclaimed work of art called the Crystal Cathedral. They could only perceive me as very successful. They had not been told that I too had walked a path similar to the one they were now walking. Should I tell them about the time a 20 below zero blizzard ranged through the lonely blackness of an Iowa night? Should I tell them how the wind whistled around the fragile country house, successfully penetrating the racks between the window frames in the northwest corner of my bedroom, leaving fresh drift of snow on the floor beside my bed? Should I tell them how we didn't have the money to buy coal to warm the house? Should I tell them how we raced to escape with our lives from a tornado? Should I tell them how we survived the great drought when the shortage of natural rainfall purchased, past the earth and proved more devastating and destructive than the shortage of cash flow that had already hit all of the Americans in the Great Depression? Should I tell them about my struggle to get through college? Should I tell them about the fire in my rooming house in which I lost the few possessions I had? Should I tell them how I had to struggle to start a church with only $500 in a strange state without friend, contacts, property, or community support? Should I tell them about my wife's bout with cancer, the near loss of my daughter's life in a motorcycle accident, the amputation of her leg? Should I share with them about struggle of the past 3 years as we have tried to help her accommodate effectively to life as a young teenager with the disfigured left stump of a leg? Should I tell them how I was forced by circumstances big beyond my control to build the Crystal Cathedral when I didn't want to build it, didn't have the money, and knew well enough that I would be criticized for building a monument? I decided not to pour out my whole life story, but I did decided to begin it with the realities of the tough time I had been through and how they had been handled successfully through a faith based on possibility thinking. Farming life has never been easy. My boyhood farm was a typical Midwestern farm. That meant it was small. The industry was not simple crop farming. The crops were harvested and fed to livestock. Chickens laid the eggs, which we traded for groceries. Cow grazed the grassland along the river that was too difficult to plow. We milked the cow and sold the milk. When hogs reached their prime weight, they were sold at market. It was an one crop a year farm. That meant that we planted the oats and the corn in the springtime and harvested it in the fall to be gathered into barns and saved for feed for the hogs. The winter season was merely a time of survival, waiting and hoping for spring. My father purchased our own farm when prices were at their peak. Real estate had been climbing steadily, climbing steadily. I was born only a few years later, September 16, 1926. How my father saved enough to buy our farm is a story in itself. Because he lost his parents as a teenager, Dad was forced to drop out of school in the sixth grade and to find the only job he could as a hired hand for the local farmers. One could always husk corn, rip each single golden ear from its nest of leaves, crack off the 6 foot stem, and throw it into the wagon. My father was a thrifty young man and was able to save a few nickels and dimes that he earned for each ear of corn he picked. Finally, he had saved enough to purchase 160-acre farm. Unfortunately, he bought it at the top of the price cycle. When I was 3 years old, the Great Depression hit. Real estate price plumped, plumbed along with the stock. While internationally farmed corporate chiefs were committing suicide in Wall Street, lonely farmers, America's original small businessmen, were clinging with broken fingernails to the earth, hoping to survive. My father was one of those thought tough, tenacious farmers. Winter was the worst. I shall never forget the time when we did not have money to buy coal. The trees that surrounded the house were considered precious living creatures that could not be sacrificed for fuel, so we never considered cutting them down and swing them up for the wood burning stove. Instead, it became my job as a child to step over the 3 foot high splintered wooden fence and cling into the hog yard among the 100 squealing hogs. With an empty basket, I maneuvered my way through the excrement, picking up every corn cob left after the hog had consumed the kernels. Not a single cob was left uncollected. Every single one was considered of real value. With an empty basket, I maneuvered my way through the excrement, picking up every corn cob left after the hog had consumed the kernels. Not a single cob was left uncollected. Every single one was considered of a real value. When the basket was filled, I would carefully carry it to tiny two-story white cider poured home where my mother, father, brother, and sister lived. The corn cob would fuel would fuel the stove in the kitchen. They would also be used in the pot belly stove in the little living room. These were the only two sources of heat in the house. Little grills in the ceilings allowed some of the heat to pass from the downstairs kitchen and living room to the upstairs bedroom, but cracks in the walls let in just as much freezing air. Do you want to hear about my experience with poverty? I said to the struggling 3,500 businessmen seated in the carpeted ballroom of the plush Hilton Hotel. Let me tell you about poverty. I was so poor we had to use corn cob to heat our homes, to keep from freezing to death in sub-zero winters. We used corn cobs because we could not afford coal. Those were tough times. I beloved. Then I recalled the year of the Great Drought, even as the economic depression ravaged the country. The Iowa farms fought a far tougher battle for reason we never understood. The normal spring rainfall never came to moisten the newly planted corns and oats. The few precious dollars that my father was able to save had to be spent on seed corn. I always wondered how he dared to risk throwing seeds in the ground where it might rot and die, when he could safely bring it to town and convert into cash. They take a chance. Why take a chance? I once asked my father, why don't you play it safe and sell it? People who never take a chance. He taught me wisely, never get ahead. Of course, there is no success without the application of the multiplication principle. It was a natural, native, basic principle that every farmer understood. So, the spring of 1931, 1932, and 1933, my father took all that he had left, the last kernels of corn, the last cup of oats, and planted them in the ground of his small Iowa farm, expecting that the rains would fall. He hoped that the seeds would become wet and bloated until they erupted with new life, sending their tender little sprout up through the softened spring soil. Light green rows of corn would begin to grow and stand out against the black background of the dark Iowa ground. Rainfall is essential to farmer success. In Iowa, farmers can expect rain to fall at least once every other week. If for some reason the rain did not fall for 3 or 4 weeks, 1 inch of the topsoil would dry out first. Then, if rain still did not come, the soil would gradually grow dry at 2, 3, 4, 5 inches deep until the hair like tentacles of the roots of the new corn plants would die. The first evidence of the death of the roots would be the wilted leaf. When the rain did not fall for 2 weeks, my father was worried. When the third and fourth weeks passed with no rain, I saw his face grew very grave. Not once did he become angry. Never did he miss praying with bowed head at the table before our morning, noon, or nighttime meals. The only thing my father did about the drought was pray. That was the only thing he could do. Farmers gathered from mills around at special prayers meeting, filling the little white churches that dotted the rolling landscapes. Out of respect and reverence to the Almighty God, each farmer came, not in his overalls, but in his one and only suit and tie. They called upon God Almighty to save their land and their crops. They asked Him to send rain. They all then all they could do was to go home and wait for His answer. For a while, for a whole year, the Lord was silent. Day after day, the sun poured down on the crops. Every day we thirstily scanned the scorching sky for a sign of a cloud. More than once I ran into the house, calling out, I have seen a cloud. God may be answering our prayers, but the cloud always dissipated. Finally, as if in fact our prayers were being answered, there was a gathering of clouds. Hopes began to rise again. The desperately needed rainfall was moving in from the west. Flashes of lightning slashed through the black sky. Thunder cracked. The trees trembled with fright as the wind whipped through their branches. It rained. I was, I was jubilant, but my father did not share my enthusiasm. Neither did my mother, for they knew what I did not know. The rain was totally inadequate. When the last thunder clap echoed in the distance, signaling the passing of the storm, the sun came out bright and hot again. We walked outdoors. My father scooped up a handful of fat, moisture, sun-faced soil. Only the top quarter inch was wet and black. Below that, the earth was powder dry. Then the wind began to blow from where we did not know. The sky turned from bright and blue to drab, drab gray to a dirty brown, and the clean, bright air that enjoyed breathing as a child suddenly became polluted with dust. That South Dakota land you are breathing, son, my father said. South Dakota, the state that bordered Iowa on the northwest, was suffering a worse drought than Iowa. It did not even enjoy the sporadic shower that moistened the surface soil. The barren land, devoid of any vegetation, lay helpless before the gathering winds. They swept the feathery particles of earth high into sky, carrying them hundreds of miles to the east, like driest of snow, and the dust settled on our farm. When the wind blew harder, the dust sandblasted the few rows of corn that had managed to survive the drought. The fragile young plant wilted and weakened for want of refreshing water, were no match for the grit driven by the hot winds. There was total devastation here and there, like bones of a dead animal. Dead corn stalks pro- protruded above the drift of dry sand. Still, the winds did not cease. It became a common procedure for my brother, sister, and me to cover our faces with wet cloths as we walked the short distance from our house to outdoor toilet. When we walked to the well, where we hoped we would be able to pump water from the 40-foot reservoir, we would have to protect ourselves from the suffocating dust with our moistened mask. Our water became more and more scarce as the meandering snakes of the river dried up. The Foley, the Foley River had been my closest childhood friend. On its green banks, near open pastures, I would lie, watching the clouds changing shape in the blue sky. It was there that I felt closest to my Creator. I become incurably addicted to God's natural green agri- gardens. Years later, I would hope and dream of a place where I could worship and see the sky above me, dry day and night. Years later, I would dream of a church that could allow all of the sky to be permanent our troubled minds with its space. peace, bringing healing from worry and anxiety. Years later, I would find that dream fulfilled in Crystal Cathedral. But during the summer of the Great Drought, I watched the river dry up. Little pools of water become mud holes where screaming bullhead catfish died. We were surrounded by death. The river was dead, the fish were dead, and most importantly, the crops were dead. Summer finally gave way to fall. Newspaper nationwide proclaimed the Midwest Farm Belt to be in total disaster. Even the New York bankers and corporate chiefs become concerned about plague that was a great, if not greater, than their own economic depression. The brand basket of America, the breadbasket of America was in ruins. If it had been a normal year, my father would have expected to harvest corn that will fill dozens of wagons. That year, my father harvested barely a half a wagon of corn, grown on a half acre of ground. In a normal year, this swampy lot, fed by some mysterious underground spring, was too wet to produce any fruit at all. My father had often thought about digging deep into the plot to drain the subsurface water away. Now, in the year of the drought, this small plot of ground was the only parcel out of 160 acres where the corn had survived. Here, the corn lived, drawing moisture from the sub, subterranean source. Here, the corn grew nearly 6 feet tall, and here we harvested the minsu- minu- minuscule crop. It was but half a wagon of corn, a total disaster. Not quite, for a half a wagon of corn was better than none at all. In fact, it was equal to the amount of seed that had been sowed earlier that year. A total loss? No. We gained nothing, but more importantly, we lost nothing. I shall never forget my father's dinner time prayer that night. Dear Lord, I thank you that I have lost nothing this year, not have given me my seed back. You have given me my seed back. Thank you. Not all farmers had as much faith as my father did. For sale, signs began to appear on farm after farm. Discouraged farmers who could not imagine that things would get better packed up and abandoned their land. Other farmers simply threw their hands in despair and allowed the bank to foreclose. More than one piece of property sold on the courthouse steps. Years later, I asked my father how he had survived. After all, he had no cash reserve. He had no rich relative. I went to the bank, my father said, and I promised them that if they would help me somehow, I did return their money. I pleaded with them to rearrange the mortgage, postpone the due date for some reason. The bank believed in me and it helped. I remember that bank. I have early childhood memories of going there in patched overalls with my father. I recall seeing this slogan on a calendar in the bank. Great people are ordinary people with extraordinary amount of determination. I am convinced that the slogan exemplified the positive attitude of my father and inspired the bankers to go along with him and give him an extension of his mortgage, mortgage payment. The slogan was explanation of my father's success and an inspiration to me to attempt the impossible too. For I had dreamed of my own to go to college and seminary. Some years later, on a quiet June afternoon, the tornado struck. I had not unpacked my suitcase, having returned only a few days before for the summer recess from my college studies. Throughout the afternoon, my dad and I could hear an awesome roar reverber- reverberating like the hum of a mighty organ. The eerie sound was like many freight trains rumbling above the threatening and gathering clouds. Sound like we are in for hailstorm. My dad murmured, sounds like we are in for a hailstorm. My dad murmured. In a desperate attempt to protect his praise rolls, we rounded up empty pails and wooden box to cover every treasured bush. It was 6 o'clock now. We had finished our evening meal in haste. From the vantage point of our front lawn, we could see more than a mile across the rolling farmland. The sun was lost now, seemingly swallowed by the black monstrous storm that was prowling the western sky. Slowly, with all slowly, with alarming stillness, like a tiger crawling up on a sleeping prey, the storm crept closer. Gusts of a hot wind blew the dry dust of the country road. The old box elder bent before the mountain winds. Out of out in the pressure a cow bellowed frenetically, calling her little calf to come to her side for safety. My riding horse seemed to sense impending disaster. He cut a commanding picture, standing erect with head held high, graceful neck arched, his tail lifted slightly, fanned in the wind. His ears searched the air for sounds of danger. Suddenly, a black lump about the size of the sun bulged out of the black sky. In an instant, it telescoped to the ground in a long, gray funnel. For a moment, it hung suspended like a slithering serpent about to strike death to helpless victims below. Dad called to Mom. It's a tornado, Channy. I asked excitedly. Are you sure it's real tornado, Dad? My first emotion was delightful excitement. This would be something to tell the fellows when I returned to the Hop College. In the fall, the funnel seemed too small could smell. I couldn't imagine the fury that could be unleashed from such a funny cloud. Call mother, son. Call mother, son, and I and tell her to take whatever she can grab and come to the car. We have got to get out of here right away. A moment later, we were driving crazily down the road. We lived on the east end of the dead end road and had to drive a mile west directly into the path of one oncoming tornado in order to reach a side road that leads south, away from the path of the storm. We made it. 2 miles south, we parked our car on the crest of the hill and watched the wick twister snap its curling power as quickly as it had dropped. It lifted and disappeared. It was all over. The storm was gone. The air was deathly still, but the danger was past. Gentle raindrops now began to fall. The tail end of dark sky dropped a soothing shower of cool rain, as if heaven were pouring a soothing balm on the fresh wounds. We could go home now. Oh God, will we find our house? We reached the crossroads, only to find a long line of cars. Curious sightseers, seeing that something terrible had happened, already were gathering. They were looking at the complete destruction of a neighboring farm, wondering if our house had been spared. We drove down the lonely road, crisscrossed by wire from broken telephone pole, toward our secluded farm. We came to the base of the hill that hid the view of our house. Before we had been able to see the peak of our barn, but now, but not now. We knew before we went over the hill that our barn was gone. Now we were on the top of the hill. We saw it. Everything was gone. Where only a half hour before there had been 9 buildings, freshly painted. Now there were none. Where there had been life, there was the silence of death. It was all gone, all dead. Only white foundation remained, laying on a clean patch of a black ground. There was no debris. Everything had simply been sucked upon and carried away. 3 little pigs, still living, suckled the breast of their dead mother, lying in the drovey well. We could hear the sicking moan of dying cattle, the hiss of grass escaping from the portable tank of Burton used to provide fuel for our stove. Then I saw my riding horse lying dead with a 14-foot long 2x2 piercing his belly. Dazed, our brain reeling, we sat in our car. My father passed 60 and had worked hard for 26 years to try to win this farm. The mortgage was about due. This seemed to kill all chances of ever saving the place from the creditors. I looked at my dad, sitting horror stricken, white haired, underweight from overwork. His hands blue, desperately gripping the steering wheels. Suddenly, those collows, collows hand with their plugging blood vessels began hitting the steering wheels of the car, and Dad cried, "It's all gone, Channy. Channy, it's all gone. 26 years, Channy, and it's all gone in 10 minutes." Dad got out of the car, ordering us to wait and walk with his can around the clean-swept tornado-vacuumed farmyard. We later find out that our house had been dropped in one smashed piece A half mile out in the pasture, we had a little sign on the kitchen wall, a little molded plaster motto. Its simple verse was, "Keep looking to Jesus." And it found and cried to the car, the broken top half, "Keep looking." Well, this was God's message to Dad. Keep looking, keep looking. Don't quit now. Don't sell out. Begin and hold on. And he did. People thought my dad was finished, but he was not. He was not finished because he would not give up. He had faith with hanging on power. There one ingredient, that mountain moving faith. There is one ingredient, that mountain moving faith, miracle generating faith, earth shaking faith, problem solving faith, and situation changing faith must have. And that ingredient is holding power. So David didn't quit. 2 weeks later, we found in a nearby town an old house that was being torn down. A section of it was available for sale for $50. So we bought this remnant and took it apart piece by piece. We saved every nail and every shingle, and from these pieces we built a new little house on the old home farm. One by one, additional farm buildings were built. 9 farms were demolished in that tornado, but my father was the only farmer to rebuild a completely demolished farm. A few years later, price rose sharply. Farm produce prospered. Farm produce prospered. Within 5 years, the mortgage was paid off. My father died a successful man. So you are having tough time? Are they tougher time than my father experienced? I looked deep into the eyes and the hearts of the new generation of Iowa farmers. Are you burning corn cobs for fuel? Have you lost everything in tornado? In the mortgage due and the cash not there? Is the mortgage due and the cash not there? Are you tempted to walk away and put the place up for sale? Then let me tell you something about tough time. I believe I have walked the path and have earned the right to comment on tough time. Let me tell you something about tough time. Tough time never lasts, but tough people do. The place broke up with applause. Those 3,500 farmers who had lost hope and had battled depression found that hope. They got a new vision, began to dream again. Are you facing tough time today? Overwhelmed? I invite you to take a walk with me. Let me tell you about survivors and how you can be one too. In the process, your life will become a light for someone else's pathway. The path it called the possibility thinking path. I have been preaching it for years. It has never let me down. It has never let anybody down. It never quiets on us. We may quit the path, but the path keeps right on going on to happiness, health, and prosperity. We may quit the path, but the path keeps right on going on to happiness, health, and prosperity. Nobody is total failure if he dares to try to do something worthwhile.